Um, um, I've heard once that if you want to be a good Austrian economist, if you want to become Austrian economist, you have to give presentations without PowerPoints. That's a very old tradition of the Mises Institute, and very interestingly, I'm going to try to become an Austrian economist today, and the impetus for that is going to be the rules of a central bank. Because ironically, because they asked us to send the presentations a week in advance and say, oh, nobody can do that, everything changes so fast. Anyways, so my speech today is about financial asset valuation, the total demand approach, and this my speech is based on the paper that I co-authored with Kilo Hilsman. It's also a topic in general of my dissertation at the University of Andre. What I'm interested in is how central banks influence prices and values of financial assets. This is the topic that I'm interested in, and I've heard today that in order to make a good speech, you have to give firstly have to give a conflict, something which is intriguing. And the conflict of mine is maybe not very intriguing, but I claim that the way mainstream economics see the channels of impact of monetary policy and central banks on prices of financial assets, they're not full channels, and that means is that I think there is a lot more there, and there is at least one or two channels that is very, very Austrian and is not really recognized by the mainstream literature, at least. So, to begin with, I need to say a little bit of what is the hell this total demand approach, because financial asset valuation, total demand approach, that's the title of my paper, of our paper, and of my speech. So, what is a total demand approach? And usually, the way we see price formation is through intersection of supply and demand. That's the usual. So there are sellers and there are buyers, and they intersect, and that's the market price. This is how, in the price theory point of view, that is how prices are formed. However, Wytautas in 1910 gave us a very interesting idea and a thought that we can look at the price formation process a little bit differently, and this is very intriguing and very strange idea. He basically said that it is unwarranted to imagine buyers and sellers, which represents supply and demand, as separate groups. He said basically that demand and supply are actually not independent ultimate causes of price formation. The way he said is that supply is just a mirror image of what he called the reservation demand. And the reservation demand, the definition of it in the broad sense, is the amount of good the current owners or producers of the good are willing to keep in their balance given the particular price, rather than offering it to the market. So if the price is very low, the sellers sometimes have a reservation demand and say, well, I'm not going to sell that good for that low of a price. I'm not going to do that. So they have a reservation demand. They withhold the good from the market. And that actually and the amount that they give to the market is usually understood through the supply. So basically he said that there are two types of demands. There is demand via exchange, is the demand for those who do not have the good and want to purchase the good. And there is a reservation demand, or the demand of those who have the good but do not want to give it to the market, want to withhold it. And so, and I quote, Wytautas is in 1910, The Common Sense of Political Economy, he said, "It may very well be that some or all the dealers would rather not sell at all than sell below some particular price. This is to say that they have put a reserve price on their goods. There may be many reasons for this, the most obvious being that the goods have direct and immediate use for the sellers themselves. The price is so low, I'm not going to get much for it, therefore I'm just going to keep it myself, may they consume it. The other reason is that they're anticipating the higher price in the future." So basically, the Wytautas and Rothbard actually used this total demand approach to explain the purchasing power of money, and I try to utilize this approach in actually explaining part process of price formation of financial assets. So in this approach, total demand approach, the ultimate causes of price formation is not the supply and demand, but actually because supply is just reservation demand, right? So we have two demands, demand via exchange and reservation demand. So ultimate causes is the total demand, which is the sum of the reservation and exchange demand, and the stock of the good. Intersection between the total demand line and the stock of the good, and the stock of the good is just the amount of the good in existence at that particular time. So the intersection between total demand and stock of the good actually gives us the market price. Mathematically, it's actually the same. mathematically can prove that the supply and demand analysis leads to the same, but it gives some notions that I'm going to be utilizing while explaining part of the process of formation of financial assets. So for some of the goods, reservation demand does not really exist, and that's what Rothbard usually says. For example, if you sell eggs, you know, whatever low is the price, you really want to push it to the market because you don't really have a very big personal use for eggs, and they also go bad. So you cannot really withhold eggs or something which is not durable from the market because it doesn't make much sense. You don't want them personally because how many eggs you can use, but then also they go bad and you cannot, you're not going to be able to sell them later because they will be bad eggs, right? But for certain goods, especially for those who are durable goods, reservation demand plays a very big of a role. And these goods, and this is what I'm going to go to, these are goods, for example, money. Money has a big reservation demand because they do not go bad, and we keep, because of uncertainty from Mises and Robert others, we are uncertain about the purchase in the future, so we have a big reservation demand for money because we anticipate we're going to use them because of their purchasing power in the future. The other good that might have a big reservation demand is financial assets. So this is the theoretical, very small tool that I'm going to be that I'm going to be using, and I'm going to be telling later how I'm going to connect that. So if we think about prices of financial assets or price of any good, it's important to realize that Austrians see money as a good in itself, right? So the price in the market is actually a ratio between one good, which is financial asset, or apples, or whatever, or bananas, and money. So it's actually agents, when they buy something, they say they exchange one good in another of the good. So price is the ratio between one and the other good. So total demand and stock analysis basically says that if we want to understand how prices are formed, we need to understand both what is the preference of market participants for that good and the stock of that good, and on the other hand, what is the preference of market participants not only for that good, but also what is the preference towards money. Because price formation is a ratio between two goods, so in order to understand price formation, we understand what are the sources and how do the preferences of market participants towards a good and money change. So these are the two types of equations, let's say, or two types of things we have to take into the consideration. And also, if we want to understand how central banks influence prices of financial assets, so we naturally have to look, okay, how do central banks influence the stock of money, the stock of financial assets, and both the preference of market participants towards financial assets. Why do market participants want to hold financial assets, and how do central banks influence that? But also, how do central banks influence the preference of market participants towards money? So that is quite important. So now, how do neoclassical, let's say mainstream economics look at what are the channels of influence of central banks on financial assets? And there are numerous of them, and I'm not going to be mentioning all of them, but mainly they work through changing stock of money, the explanation, and preferences of market participants towards financial assets. Let's say there is direct demand effect, so-called, or interest rate channel basically says that when central banks has a direct demand, it purchases financial assets, it bids up its price, and the higher price for bonds means lower interest rate. It also influences, induces market participants to change their preference towards financial assets. For example, liquidity effect. Liquidity effect basically says when central bank dumps money into economy, people have more money in their balances, and they have more money than they want, so they spend it on something, and part of the spending is on financial assets, so financial asset prices go up. Recently, especially with quantitative easing, the portfolio balance effect is quite very often mentioned. It is when the central bank purchases particular type of financial assets, a central bank induces market participants to rebalance their portfolios by purchasing similar financial assets. Or let's say so-called return effect is influencing the performance of the economy. If we believe it's positive influence of, for example, reducing interest rates or increasing stock of money supply, so economy grows, there are higher profits, and therefore the assets become more attractive. So these are the effects. So, and summarize these effects, and I cannot go through all the literature. We basically say that the way and the channels are understood, it's either through changing the stock of money, or supply of money, so-called, or through changing the preferences of market participants towards financial assets. Now, from my theoretical point of view, what I said, there is something missing. And what is missing is that these channels are preoccupied with money stock and preferences towards financial assets, but what's missing is how do central banks influence market participants' preferences towards money. And this is the channel that this is my thesis, this is the channel that I think is missing in this analysis. And I'm gonna explain it very quickly by two examples, and one of them utilizing recent work which was done mainly by Vytautas when he talks about the quality, the notion of quality of money. We usually talk about the quantity of money. Central banks change quantity of money and influence all the processes in the economy. But Vytautas said there are more, not only quantitative but qualitative characteristics of money that is important to how much people perceive the purchasing power in the future, or how much money they hold, they reserve in their balances. So quality of money is defined as the capacity of money as perceived by market participants or actors to fulfill its main functions, namely to serve as a medium of exchange, a store of wealth, and as an unit of account. There's some discussions about that, but let's keep them apart. So money has a big reservation demand because people anticipate, they hold money in their balances, they anticipate purchasing power in the future, and that anticipation is of a subjective nature, right? Because they trust, they hold that because they believe, trust purchasing power in the future, because they trust basically monetary, to some degree, lesser or higher or lesser, they trust monetary institutions and they trust financial system. So in order to understand the preferences of market participants towards money, we need to understand that not only the quantitative but qualitative characteristics of money are important, and they depend, for example, on the organizational structure, let's say independence, accountability, transparency, constitutional aims, managers of a central bank, balance sheet of a central bank, what assets, what quality of assets back money supply, so liquidity of assets, quality of assets. What is the stability of the financial system? Of course, if this financial system is unstable, we cannot anticipate high purchasing power of money in the future. Forward guidance, how inflationary policy, how much inflationary policy, and for how long central banks are saying that it's going to be. So all of these criteria, and none of them are actually only about the quantity of money. A lot of it is about other structural characteristics of money. Really changes how people perceive quality of money and actually its purchasing power in the future. So the idea is that central banks, through all of these channels, changing the quality of money actually changes people's preferences towards money. And if the policy is in the way that quality of money diminishes, so preferences of market participants towards money or demand of money diminishes. Diminishing demand basically means lower purchasing power, and that means higher prices, right? So that's one of the channels of influence of monetary policy towards prices in general. But the second point, and the last point I'm going to say, is that there is another thing, is that what central banks do is they have an aim of price inflation, right? Prices always go up. One of the main aims of the central bank of prices of going up 2% CPI or something like that. Some people say it's either higher. So in this respect, it is suicidal, or it is very, very unprofitable to hold money as a way to store value or to save, right? So in this respect, which means that people which want to save, they try to look for assets that would hedge them against inflation, right? So if people, because of the reduced quality of money and reduced preferences towards money, they're looking for something where they could invest and to hold assets that would increase in value to hedge against inflation, there are certain things certain assets they can buy, and what part of these assets, it can be real estate, but part of these assets are financial assets. So the idea of this article that we've written is that central banks, through changing the quality of money, by reducing the quality of money, reduce the demand for money, or reduce the market participants' demand for money, which already has an inflationary effect on the economy in general. And also, financial assets are very often seen as a hedge against inflation. Therefore, this reduced preference towards money is shifting to all kinds of asset classes, and one of these asset classes is financial assets. And this is the impact of monetary policy on prices in general, and also on prices of financial assets, that is usually omitted and not discussed in this mainstream analysis of channels of impact of monetary policy on prices in general and on financial assets in particular. So thank you very much. I'll be waiting for questions.
So, questions? Yes, please.
Very interesting, as you mentioned, the financial assets. I think you have to distinguish between bonds and equities.
Yeah, well,
bonds are no good if inflation rises, unless they are inflation-linked bonds, of course. But if for the stock market, this total demand approach, if I understand it right, where the supply and demand curve meet, there's usually the stock price. This is the usual equilibrium between supply and demand.
Right.
And if you have the total demand approach, could that mean that some market participants who are holding stocks, who might be potential suppliers, they do not sell because of fear of missing out, FOMO, or whatever? They say no, because if I think this stock, it might be overvalued, I should sell it, but I cannot sell it because I have the fear it might be rising and I have no real sensible alternative to put my money in. So the total demand is higher than the normal demand, and this might lead to an exponential price rise in the stock market.
Exactly. So that's one of our point of view, that not only the ones who demand via exchange are influencing price, but actually those who hold the assets, they are also very big participants in the price formation mechanism. And if they believe that, okay, I don't want to sell because I think it's going to increase in price because monetary policy, inflationary monetary policy, or maybe earnings of companies for different reasons. They are also very important participants in the price formation mechanism. And I think this approach really explains why the quantitative theory of money, we Austrians are always criticized. Why the hell is the case? Inflationary policies are there, and money stock is going up, supply money, but it doesn't translate into inflation. So I think this approach, which basically says that, well, the money value comes from the high reservation demand of money. If people believe that the inflation is still not going to be there, they're going to hold money. But it's very subjective. It can change like that. If there is something, Germany's car production company goes bust, and so we say, and all my money and then people's perception of, okay, German, very important producer, and then it's related with monetary policy, it's going to be, there's going to be crash, and the reservation demand can diminish like that. So the quantity theory of money, which is with this small formula, is very automatic, it's very mechanistic, whereas total demand approach sees that the value of money and financial assets goes really through subjective valuations, which can change very, very quickly. So I think that's the other value of it.
Thank you.
Next question.
So Philip Marcus actually analyzed the balance sheets of central banks, and in order to assess quality. So basically what they did, quantitative easing, is they loaded up assets, and you could end up with deflation actually. So deflation might induce you keep money, though the quality of the central bank's balance sheet is bad. So because you win a real interest rate if you have deflation. But you still might be, not convinced of the balance sheet. So what about that one?
Well, what I'm doing is, this is a theoretical framework, and I'm writing a dissertation, and I need to have an empirical part, which is not always easy with this kind of, because I need to quantify something which is, I claim myself, very subjective, which is the quality of money. But I'm compiling an index, and I'll see where it gets me, where I see, okay, index, I mentioned what are the sources of the quality of money might be, like the stability of financial system, the quality of balance sheet, forward guidance, organizational structure. So I'm trying to quantify these and come up with an index which would not only show the quantity of money, but also the quality of money. So I'll see where it gets me, and one part of that index is the quality of a central bank and balance sheet. So I don't know. So my aim is to see whether that has any impact on the prices of financial assets. So, but I don't know the results yet. We'll see. Maybe I'll fail. Maybe not.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.